All right. We are rolling here. Okay. Looks good. Thanks for joining us for night 9 of our 24 nights of live streams. And let me share a screen and we'll get things started by reciting the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. You know, I say this every night. This is our mission statement that as Americans. And tonight we're going to get into the second duty, ensuring domestic tranquility. You know, all our members of Congress, all our elected officials, they take an oath to uphold the Constitution. We have a constitutional duty to ensure domestic tranquility. And so when politicians fight, when politicians try and wedge the American people apart to get them polarized against their neighbor, they are failing. They are actively doing the exact opposite of what the framers intended. They are not ensuring domestic tranquility. They are promoting domestic rancor. So one of the ways that they have been, let me stop sharing here. One of the ways they have been most successful in doing this is by using wedge issues. And the two of the biggest wedge issues are guns and abortion. Now, I think we talked last week about how a plurality of Americans don't really identify with a major political party. But as much as people want to say they are independent, they tend to vote with one party or the other because of wedge issues, right? You may not like the Republican Party, but if you are anti-gun control and pro Second Amendment to the extreme, you really only have one choice. Similarly, if you are pro-life, you're frequently made to feel unwelcome within the Democratic Party. And so as our political systems have become more homogenized, political parties have become more homogenized over the recent decades thanks to the internet, those big tents have started to define some issues more narrowly than others. And so what do? The average American who knows that the system in Washington is not working and is looking for a middle ground, that knows that when it comes to guns, your two choices aren't everyone should have AK-47s and no one should have any guns at all. There is a wide range of legislative possibilities in the middle of that. Similarly, when it comes to abortion, your two choices aren't abortions should be legal after birth or nobody should ever have any abortion at all. There is a wide range of opinions in the middle, and that's where most people fall. Most people are very much in the middle on these things because people have common sense. But when it comes to wedges are used to demonize and divide people. And that's not good for our country. We can do better by not being divided and instead focus on what we have in common. And when it comes to these wedge issues, there's actually a lot of things that the average American agrees on. But Congress has no incentive to act, because if you gave an inch to the other side, which political parties define as their opponents, as each political party says that they are the moral choice, and the other side is the immoral side to be demonized. You can't give an inch. You can't compromise, because then that would reveal that the whole charade. And so this polarization has stopped us from getting things done, and it causes a lot of unnecessary suffering in this country. We're going to get into this. And you don't need me to tell you this. You know this. You know the system isn't working, and that's why The American union model of unionizing swing voters allows us to do an end run around the whole thing. We can stop fighting over which candidate is the lesser of two evils to get them elected to Congress, to throw them in the swamp of Washington, D.C., and hope that somehow things will get done. Instead, we can flip the model around. We have the ability to crowdsource the legislative process outside of Washington, D.C., to write good, clean legislation that addresses real problems in American society, and offer this as a set of terms across all 470 federal elections with a very clear message. Members of Congress, get this done before the election and we will let you keep your jobs. If you refuse, we can throw you out of office, we can throw you out of power. The presidential candidates on both sides are demonizing the other one. And again, there's a quote, I don't think I have it in front of me, but from Sebastian Junger's book on tribes, which I'm going to quote again later. And he says, this sort of demonization, the idea that your political opponents should be locked up, this kind of thing could easily be considered treason. That you're actively trying to divide and weaken our country. And it's not doing us any good. So we can stop. There is, the slide usually begins, there is a constructive alternative to politics as usual. So we've spent the last week looking at the criminal justice reforms, and tonight we are going to get into Title II, Insuring Domestic Tranquility. Guns and abortion. All right, well, let's start with a little bit of context. So guns and abortions, again, are used as wedge issues. And one of them, the motivations, right? One of the driving factors in declaring that your side is the moral side and the other side is the evil opponent, is a desire to reduce needless deaths. This is something that should not be controversial at all, to want to reduce needless deaths. But conversation isn't framed that way, which allows us to reframe it in a more constructive way. So as you probably know, it was 2 years ago that the Supreme Court, their Dodd's decision, overturned Roe v. Wade. And so that really shifted the discussion around abortion. So it needed to be addressed. In previous iterations of the American Union's political campaigns, we offered just a truce. But because the Supreme Court destabilized the status quo, this year's legislative package addresses that. Now, I say that the Supreme Court destabilized the status quo, and that's true. But the only reason that it is true is because of Congress. As I've said time and again, Congress is the problem. Congress is failing to set national policy. And so when Roe v. Wade was decided, Congress gave the Supreme Court the ability, they let them set national abortion policy. And then for 50 years, Congress failed to actually write a law that would codify this national policy, and instead just let the Supreme Court do it. Once again, the legislative branch has tied itself in knots, and so the executive branch and the judicial branch frequently have to step in to set policy because Congress is failing to do their job. It's okay. There are many good, thoughtful, caring people in Congress, but the system itself is broken. We can help them. We can help them solve problems by coming together around one pre-written package of legislation and saying, we want to help you solve these problems, and we're willing to put our votes behind it. You're going to have the opportunity to pledge your vote on October 15th on Muster Day, where the October 15th Muster Day is a one-day general strike and a national fast for peace. Fasting is willingly giving something up, and that is an essential ingredient in compromise. This package is full of compromises. We're going to talk about some tonight because that's how adult relationships work. You don't get everything that you want just because you really, really want it. It's part of adulting. And so as a nation, we can stop fighting and we can get back to the business of adulting and get our act together nationwide. All right. So we talked about Congress is the reason that that this abortion policy changed. We talked about how everyone supports wanting to reduce needless deaths. And when it comes to abortion, that's happened, right? Since 1980, the number of abortions has fallen by half. Gun deaths, on the other hand, have trended upwards, which is, we'll talk about more in a minute. So what about the women who still seek abortions? Well, 2/3 of them say they can't afford the baby. Now, you remember what the first plank of the Trump-Biden peace plan is here? Ending poverty. Ending poverty. We've made a policy choice to allow 130 million Americans to live in or near poverty. And we can fix that. It is very fixable. And when we do, the number of women who seeking abortion will fall. We will reduce needless deaths. We will go after the primary cause, right? We talked about supply and demand in the drug war, that cutting off the supply of drugs does not work. And instead, we can address the demand side, help people have healthier, happier lives so they don't need drugs as an escape. Once again, if we can help people have more financially stable lives, and we can, then abortion will be a less appealing alternative. All right, and then the third point is what should be obvious to anyone in this debate over guns and abortion is we have to acknowledge that total bans are futile. It is impossible to ban all abortions. It is impossible to ban all guns. So anyone who's advocating for that has to recognize that, no, that's not realistic. So let's do the things that are realistic. Again, when it comes to abortion, most abortions now are pharmaceutical. And as we talked about with the drug war, banning drugs does not work. It will not work. And as a result of the Dobbs decision and the fracturing of abortion policy in the United States, there have been some horrific edge cases where we have increased the number of needless deaths by them. So let's not do this anymore. Let's do some common sense policy. All right, let me pull up the legislative package here, and we will start by reading the findings. The findings and purpose for this subtitle. All right, section 201, findings and purpose. The Congress finds the following. 1. In the 21st century political battlefield, two of the most polarizing issues are guns and abortions. Political parties use them as wedge issues, dividing Americans by stoking fears that the other party will take access to one of these things. 2. Proponents of restricting access to guns and abortion are a minority of the American people. According to Gallup polls in 2021, just 19% of Americans supported making all abortion illegal, and 80% opposed a handgun ban. 3. Proponents of restricting access to guns and abortion share a common goal of wanting to prevent needless deaths. Other provisions in this legislative package will reduce the demand for abortion as well as gun deaths, which are mostly suicides. 4. When Roe v. Wade was reversed, Congress's failure to set national abortion policy for the last 5 decades had national consequences. Antique legislative provisions, such as the Comstock Act, came back into relevance. 5. By declaring a truce on these items for a period of time, where all sides both give and gain concessions, the United States can better focus on addressing the root causes of needless deaths. The purpose of this title is to promote domestic tranquility by establishing a truce on the issues of guns and abortion, and removing certain inflammatory legislative proposals from consideration for 10 years. Yes, that is the basic framework of, we're gonna, let me just give you the highlights real quick before we get into details. And if you just want the one sentence version, I encourage you to check out the 101 legislative policies link that's in the chat that breaks down all 101 policies of the Trump-Biden peace plan into a single sentence. Where was I? What does this legislative package do? When it comes to, I'm just actually just read it off the 101 policies. All right, ensuring domestic tranquility. One, we're going to restore Roe v. Wade and restrict pre-viability, about 23 weeks, prohibitions on abortions. Just like under Roe v. Wade, everything after that is left to the states. Two, we're going to codify the Hyde Amendment and prohibit federal funds for elective abortions. Three, amend the Comstock Act and ensure male access to pharmaceutical options. And prohibit Congress from loosening or increasing the previous three items for 10 years. It's a 10-year truce. Then on the gun side, we're going to establish universal background checks for gun sales, and we're going to ban bump stocks, and then prohibit Congress from any further restrictions on guns for 10 years. This is a middle ground where nobody gets everything they want, but everybody comes out ahead. Let me say that again. Everybody comes out ahead. We all benefit from living in a society that addresses these problems instead of ignoring them and doing nothing. We have the ability to do this. The system has perverse incentives the way it is now, and we can fix that with the American Union model. All right, so the first of these is codification of the Hyde Amendment. If you're not familiar, this is a restriction that gets tucked into the budget every year since 1977. There was a congressman from Illinois who after Roe v. Wade named Henry Hyde, who got this introduced into the budget, saying that no federal funds could be used for abortions, and gets stuck back in there every single year. But there are fights over this. President Biden this year, when he introduced a budget, he purposely excluded the Hyde Amendment, and he even campaigned on repealing the Hyde Amendment. Congress reattached it because, again, this is just the status quo. And so we're going to maintain the status quo by getting rid of the threat to repeal the Hyde Amendment and to not include the Hyde Amendment, so that there cannot be any fighting over it for 10 years, and just put it into law, which is how Congress should be passing policy anyway, instead of as budget amendments. All right, let me share my screen again here. And so here's what it says. And this language comes from Senate Bill 142 from 2013, the Hyde Amendment Codification Act. So it creates a new section of law, and in general, no funds authorized may be expended for abortion. And the exceptions are for if the pregnancy is an act of rape or incest, in the case where a lethal fetal abnormality is certified by a physician, make it improbable the infant would survive until their first birthday, or in the case where a woman suffers from a physical disorder, injury, or illness, including a life-endangering physical condition caused by or arising from the pregnancy, that would place the woman in danger of death unless an abortion is performed. So to save the woman's life, rape or incest, or it's a non-viable pregnancy where women who have bumped into these horrific edge cases in states this year coined the phrase, "You have to carry the baby to bury the baby." So, all right, we're gonna codify the Hyde Amendment. All right, Section 203, amending the Comstock Act. And I just said that Congress has refused to pass national abortion policy. And that's not exactly true, because 150 years ago, in 1873, Congress did in fact pass a national abortion policy. They prohibited the interstate transport of any drug, medicine, article, or thing designed, adapted, or intended for producing abortion. And while this was generally irrelevant since Roe, the law sat on the books because Congress did not fix it. And in the post-obs world, this is now relevant. Again, most abortions are pharmaceutical. So if this law were enforced, if the Justice Department decided to enforce this, they could halt the mailing of any drug or medicine that is used. And so for women in states where access is reduced, access to abortion is reduced, then this may be their only practical option to terminate an early stage pregnancy. If you've heard about Project 2025, they propose vigorous enforcement of this provision of law. Second, as a strict reading of this law, a strict reading of this law could actually ban the transport of any equipment related to quote unquote producing abortion. It should also be noted that instead of noting, let me just show you the actual language of the 1873 Comstock Act. And like everything in the legislative package is all hyperlinked to its places in the US code. So you can click on the link, which is what I just did to pull this up, and you can read the actual text of the law that would be amended by this legislation. So yeah, this is the law, and it says anyone who knowingly uses the mails, carriage in the mails, or delivery of anything declared by this section to be non-mailable. So for FedEx, for UPS, for any shipping, trucking company to deliver anything, a strict reading says that they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 5 years for a first offense. I would just think about what a very strict interpretation of this law could mean. So let's go ahead and pull back up the text of the legislative language, and this probably looks very familiar without the strike-throughs. And so you can see all of these things are struck through. So it leaves us with every obscene, lewd, lascivious, indecent, filthy, or vile article, matter, thing, device, or substance, all that struck through, is declared to be non-mailable matter and shall not be conveyed in the mails or delivered from the post office or by any letter carrier. Again, this is sort of like when we did all these strike-throughs in the mandatory minimum section. This isn't necessarily a judgment on the existing law that it stays unchanged, just this is what we're focused on at the moment. So again, so for any of those things, indecent includes matters of a character tending to incite arson, murder, or assassination. Those things would still remain a federal crime. Then the other section is bringing into the United States and leaving alone the current restrictions on obscene, lewd, lascivious, or filthy book, pamphlet, picture, motion picture, film, etc. Would strike the provisions related to drugs, medicines, items intended for producing abortion. So, yeah, I don't know if you even, if you can see it here. This also includes information about how, where, or from whom that abortion information or abortions may be obtained or made. So again, a strict reading of this current law, the Comstock Act, could mete out 5-year prison sentences to any websites that make this information publicly available. Anyways, this law was passed in 1873, and so let's agree that 150 years ago, maybe it seemed like a good idea, but we're gonna move on. We're gonna strike those as part of this 10-year compromise. We're gonna take those provisions of the Comstock Act off the books. That's what Section 203 does. Section 204, moving on to reestablishing a fetal viability threshold. This is essentially the Roe Doctrine. And I got some polling numbers here somewhere. Anyways, I think tomorrow we're gonna take an in-depth look. Instead of legislation, we're gonna just look at how popular the provisions of the Trump-Biden peace plan are. So I will get more into the polling numbers tomorrow. All right. When the court struck down with the Dobbs decision, they struck down Roe v. Wade. They kicked abortion policy back to the states. And so Roe v. Wade would reestablish it at viability at about 23 weeks. And after that, just like it was before, things would be left to the states. So the difference here, though, is instead of having a Supreme Court decision be the law of the land, we're actually writing specific legislative language, right? We should be governed by laws that everyone can access, as opposed to judicial decisions, which frequently need to be, interpreted. There's the poll number: 56%. 56% of registered voters support restoring Roe v. Wade. So, once again, post-viability abortion policy will be left to the states, with 3 exceptions. First, if the abortion is to protect the life or health of the woman, states can't prohibit it. And so, as we've seen in the last few years, including a health exemption is important. There was a woman in Oklahoma that went to the emergency room and they told her, sit in the parking lot. Just sit in the parking lot and wait until your complications become life-threatening, and then, only then, will we perform this medically necessary abortion. This is not a good way to run public health policy. All right, second, the lethal fetal abnormality, which makes it improbable that the infant would survive until their first birthday. So in those cases, if you don't discover until post-viability that the fetus has something horrifically wrong with it, the newborn will die before reaching their first birthday, then you can have access to abortion. It's not mandatory, but then it is the woman's choice. The case I referred to a minute ago is a case from Louisiana where doctors refused to abort a fetus that was missing the top of its skull. And the woman had to travel to New York to get the health care she needed. And she described the process of having to carry my baby to bury my baby. And then third, there's a limited exemption for non-consensual pregnancies, right? It's the rape incest qualification that's frequently attached to these things. It is not a blank check. You can't wait until the 9th month and say, oh, you know what, I was raped. I decide I want to abort this baby after all. The window of opportunity is a week, because what is the purpose? What is the purpose of the rape and incest exemption? What is the purpose of this? It's to make sure that the woman has an opportunity to consent, right? Consent is the critical thing here. And if she didn't consent, then basic fairness says she ought to be able to. She ought to be able to give consent or refuse to carry the child that resulted from rape. So this post-viability exemption is not a blank check, but it guarantees a 1 week window for a woman who learns of a pregnancy post-viability to make an informed decision. So if you already knew about it, then you should have taken care. If you knew about it from the beginning, then you should have taken care of it before viability. But if you don't find out until afterwards, it's not too bad, so sad. You have a week to think about it. But if this fetus is viable and we want to reduce needless deaths, then make a decision before you're too much further along. So this is a middle ground. This is a middle ground. All right, let me share my screen again. We'll briefly look over the specific legislative language that's in here that spells out everything I've just described. Definitely, what is rape? What is rape and incest? So this is a criminal act. Criminal act shall mean a reasonable suspicion that a criminal act has occurred. Does not require that there be a specific criminal complaint filed. It does not require that there be a police report or an active investigation. It does not require any of those things, just that a reasonable suspicion that criminal act, rape, has occurred. So again, there's not, as some states have interpreted these sorts of things to say, well, if you're claiming your pregnancy was a result of rape, then tell us who did it. And if you're not willing to give the name, then we're not going to believe you. A reasonable suspicion is the lowest burden of proof. Fetal viability, again, means the point of pregnancy where there is a significant likelihood of the fetus surviving outside of the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. So if the baby is born prematurely at that point, there's a significant likelihood that it would survive. Reasonable window of opportunity, again, reasonable window of opportunity to make an informed decision, 7 days, a week, provided that if they choose to terminate the pregnancy, it should be exercised within 3 business days. Basic definition of state, an undue burden, and that states can't put in undue burdens on women. It means any burden including unnecessary health regulations that is the purpose or effect of placing a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking to terminate a pregnancy. So, all right, those are our definitions. The law would say a state shall not prohibit an individual from obtaining or using contraceptives or contraceptive care. Again, spelling out exactly what national policy is, that individuals have an individual civil right to obtain and use contraceptives. 2, shall not impose an undue burden on the ability of a woman to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy before fetal viability. So very clear, states shall not put any burdens on the ability of a woman to choose before viability. 3, may regulate, this is not an obligation, but states may regulate the termination of a pregnancy after viability, except, and then here's our 3 exemptions, to protect the life or health of the pregnant woman, the lethal fetal abnormality, or if the pregnancy was the result of a non-consensual criminal act, and the woman has had a reasonable window of opportunity to make an informed decision about the continuation of the pregnancy. And last, states may enact regulations to further the health or safety of a woman seeking to terminate a pregnancy. Again, nothing in the section shall be construed to have any effect on laws regarding conscience protection. If you're a doctor who is not willing to do these sorts of procedures, as a matter of conscience, then this would not obligate you to do so any more than any existing laws regarding conscience protection. The Attorney General may seek injunctive relief for any state laws passed in contravention of this section, and the prevailing party can get reasonable attorney's fees. And then, of course, the standard severance clause, if any part of this is held to be invalid by a future Supreme Court decision, the rest shall not be affected thereby. All right, so that's the abortion half of the truce. I'm going to set this abortion policy in place for 10 years. In 10 years, after we've ended poverty and driven down the demand for abortions, we can reevaluate and say, all right, what are we going to do now? This is not intended to be a one-time fix where everything will run perfectly from now until perpetuity. This is a truce. This is a let's stop fighting over these wedge issues for 10 years. Let's stop fighting. We can do it by unionizing as voters and being willing to tell Congress, we want to help you get this done before the election, and we'll let you keep your jobs if you do it. If Congress doesn't, then they can be kicked out of office and kicked out of power. All right, that's the abortion half. The other half is guns. And once again, guns are a big wedge issues because it's pitched as if you allow any sort of restriction, any sort of common sense restriction, then the only place that it can end up is by a total abolition of every gun. And that's just silly. That's just silly to decide that there can be nothing other than a slippery slide all the way to the bottom. So we've got two parts in here. First is the universal background checks, which again are extremely popular with the public, and banning bump stocks. Now, I want to point out this is a new section in the legislation. This was not in the original set of demands on January 15th when the 2024 campaign kicked off. We'll talk more on October 2nd, the International Day of Nonviolence, about the aspects of nonviolence, about the Gandhi and Satyagraha campaign. But briefly, one of the rules is once you start the campaign, you can't add on new demands later. However, there is an exemption for new injustices and new issues that arise. And in this case, it was a Supreme Court decision on June 14th that reopened the bump stock loophole. Bump stocks, if you're not familiar, and I wasn't until October 2nd, 2017, when in Las Vegas, a shooter opened up from a hotel room, opened up on a crowd of people and killed, I believe, 53 of them. Bump stocks essentially allow a semi-automatic weapon to be fired repeatedly without faster than any human could pull the trigger, so that the recoil from each shot engages the trigger again. So when that happened, Donald Trump, using the executive branch, banned bump stocks by passing a federal rule that said these things are now considered machine guns, and accordingly, since machine guns are banned, these are also banned. Why? Why did he have to pass this by a rule? Say it with me. Because Congress is failing to act. That's why. And so he passed it as a rule, and there it sat for since 2017, 2018, remember, went into effect, and made bump stocks prohibited, treated them like machine guns. But the Supreme Court this year said, you know what? You can't do that by executive action. They said specifically, if you want to ban bump stocks, you have to do it. Congress has to do it. The ban has to come from Congress. Okay, we can help them. We can help Congress do what should have been done years ago and ban the bump stocks. So that's why this new issue was added to the legislative package this year. And I'll pull up the language here real quick and you can take a look, but it's, like I said, it is just treating bump stocks as machine guns and subjecting them to the same regulations that machine guns have, which is it's pretty much impossible to get them. So we close the bump stock loophole by taking the existing law and adding bump stock to the term firearm and defining that as a manual, power-driven, or electronic device that is designed that when the device is attached to a semi-automatic weapon, it eliminates the need for the operator to make a separate movement for each individual function of the trigger. So in the Supreme Court decision, I forget who wrote who wrote the opinion in support of striking it down, but he said, well, technically, you don't have to, it does require a separate pull for each bullet that's fired. Okay, but you're using a device in order to do it faster than any human could possibly do it. So that is the difference. All right, so bump stock also includes any combination of parts that are designed to eliminate the operator to make a separate movement for each individual function of the trigger. This is the key, distinction that you would have to, you still, just like any semi-automatic weapon, you would have to pull the trigger, or you would have to make a motion for each pull of the trigger. If you don't have to do that, then it falls under the category of machine gun. And again, just to clarify that this approximates the action or rate of fire of a machine gun. And define semi-automatics. Okay. Again, adding that term to existing law. Inserting bump stock before everywhere the machine gun is referred to in section 922. Inserting bump stock into the list of items. And then we get into, it shall be unlawful for any person to transfer or possess a machine gun. Again, this applying to the bump stocks with, here's the details, right? The lawful possession of a bump stock that on or before February 28th, 2025. So 4 months. You got 4 months to register in accordance with the registration ones. So if you've already got one, like if you had a machine gun before they were banned in 1938, I believe, you could register it. But you couldn't buy and sell them after that date. Oh, what did I just do? Lost my place here. One of the disadvantages of a 311-page legislative package is trying to find the specific lines that you're looking for. All right. Okay, yes. And so in the last part, subsection C, application to possession on date of enactment. So when the Trump-Biden peace plan was signed, it would not be immediately illegal, but there would be 4 months till February 28th, 2025, for people to register them as part of the existing National Firearms Registry and Transfer Record. So, all right, that is the bump stocks one. Next, we have Universal Background Checks Act, firearms transfers. And okay. So once again, what is the symptom that what's the symptom that we're trying to address here? And it's needless deaths. So when it comes to gun deaths, it's 50,000 people a year. 50,000 people a year last year lost their lives to guns, all ages, races, genders, and most of those deaths, gun deaths, are suicides. So what is causing these deaths of despair? Once again, poverty. Poverty exacerbates things like financial problems, can exacerbate drug use, depression, difficulties with relationships, all of these things that are conditions that can drive someone to suicide. So by ending poverty, we will improve America's overall mental health and we will drive down the number of suicides. We can do this. All right. Mass shootings are a small but a very highly visible portion of gun deaths. And it is not a new phenomenon in America. This has happened before. And it happened back in the 1930s during the previous iteration of the Phoenix Cycle. And Sebastian Junger, in his book Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging, this is what he observed. Quote, "The first time that the United States suffered a wave of rampage shootings was during the 1930s, when society had been severely stressed and fractured by the Great Depression. Once again, when the social fabric of the nation wore thin, in large part to economic inequality, then people snapped. People went out and shot each other. And that was one of the things that led to the Machine Gun Regulation Act, bans, whatever, in the 1930s too. Is that Congress said, look, we've got to do something about this. And so they did. We can help Congress do this again. Address these, but not just through bans, but by addressing the core issue of we can address wealth inequality, as we'll talk more about next week, with unconditional basic income plus a value-added tax. So one of these highly visible mass shootings occurred in Parkland 6 years ago, and journalist Matt Taibbi, he wrote in Rolling Stone, he wrote an article called "If We Want Kids to Stop Killing, the Adults Have to Stop Too." And so he tied together the idea of a large military, a culture of military glorification, as well. He wrote deep-seated cultural ideas about the virtue of military supremacy and the political efficacy of violence. He said those are related to the rise in mass shootings that we've seen. And quote, "This madness won't stop until we stop believing that killing makes us strong, or that we can kill without guilt or consequences just by being precise. What beliefs like this actually make us is insane and damaged, and it's no surprise that our kids too are beginning to become collateral damage." You know, my kids are teens, and they've grown up with this. The practicing active shooter drills in schools, things that previous generations didn't have. Schools weren't always, fun, weren't always the best. Schools were not always, weren't perfect necessarily, but by allowing a culture to develop where active shooter drills are necessary, we're inflicting childhood trauma, unnecessary trauma on our kids. So let's work together to fix this. And so that is why our third plank, Ending the Endless Wars, will address this glorification of violence that the military embodies. These issues are all tied together. That's why Dr. King identified them as the triple evils. So we want to reduce the culture of violence. Let's do it and help people make better decisions. All right. We talked about the bump stock loopholes. Now the universal background checks. It was HR 8 for a number of years in the House. The House passed it a couple of times. And again, 84%, according to a March 2021 poll, 84% of voters support universal background checks. And so what this would do is, if you're going to buy a gun and you're legal, then it would require, let me rephrase that. What this section 211, what it does is it prohibits a firearm transfer between private parties unless either a licensed gun dealer, manufacturer, importer first takes possession and conducts the background check, or the transfer is exempt for a half a dozen different reasons, and we're gonna spell out those reasons here in a second. That's it. So if you're buying a gun from somebody on Craigslist, then you've got to first bring it to a licensed gun dealer, manufacturer, importer, and have a background check done. And universal background checks will help catch the number of people who buy guns that are not legally entitled to have them. All right, let me share my screen and we can look at that list of exemptions. Try and do this quick because I know we're coming up on the hour here. All right, unlawful for any person, okay. Other exemptions doesn't apply to law enforcement agencies to the extent that they're acting within their official duties. A transfer exchange that is a loan or bona fide gift between spouses, domestic partners, parents and children, step-parents, stepchildren, siblings, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, grandparents, grandchildren, if the transferor has no reason to believe the transferee will use or intend to use the firearm in a crime, or is prohibited from possessing firearms under state and federal law. So if grandpa wants to give his 13-year-old grandson a hunting rifle for his birthday, then he doesn't have to do a background check on the grandson first, as long as he has no reason to believe that he intends to use the firearm in a crime. C, transfer is part of an estate or trust that occurs as part of, so grandpa leaves you the gun collection in the will, it is exempt from the universal background checks. D, a temporary transfer that is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm, including harm to self, family, other household members, or others. There's been discussion of, we have red flag laws in this discussion of gun control, right? And so if you say, you know what, I'm feeling depressed and maybe suicidal, and I want to take my guns, get them out of my house, and give them to someone else to hold. You don't have to perform a universal background check in order to do that. Similarly, it works the other way. My crazy ex-girlfriend is driving by my house and has threatened to kill me. I can borrow a gun from somebody, in those sorts of situations where exigent circumstances dictate. Transfer under section 518.12 of the Internal Revenue Code. I don't recall what that is off the top of my head, but it's a clickable link. Temporary transfers. So temporary transfers, so if you're going to a shooting range, gallery, doing target shooting, doing hunting, that kinds of things, you can borrow a gun from somebody to do that, as long as, once again, there's no reason to believe that it's going to be used for an illegal purpose, that they'll comply with the existing law, and it's three different things: at a shooting range, while hunting, trapping, whatever, or while you're in the presence of the transferor. So again, here you want to see my gun, you don't need to do a universal background check before handing it, letting someone look at it in your presence. All right, you make forms available in Spanish, English, no. And then in our next section, section 212, no firearm registry authorized. So just to be very clear, universal background checks is not a back door to that slippery slope of a national gun registry. No firearm registry is authorized by this. However, it does not interfere with the authority of the state to enact a law on the same subject. So if the states have the power, they can do it. And this would be effective January 1, 2025. So 2 months after passage. All right. Now let's get into the truce. See if we can get through this in the next 5 minutes. So the truce is for 10 years. So the following things, it would be, shall not be in order in the House of Representatives or the Senate to consider any bill that would amend or repeal. Number one is the Hyde Amendment, inserted by Section 202 of this Act. Amend or repeal Section 204, the codification of the reestablishing of a viability threshold. Or, number two says, or otherwise prohibit or restrict access to abortion or abortion-related material. So you can't amend or repeal that codification, and you can't otherwise prohibit or restrict access to abortion. Amend or repeal subsection 922, the universal background checks, or prohibit the manufacture, sale, or possession of a firearm. Firearm means any weapon, including a starter gun. So no gun bans, no abortion bans. A House of Representatives or the Senate cannot introduce these things. Violation would be a Class B misdemeanor, which carries a penalty of between 5 and 30 days, 30 days in jail. So if members of Congress felt really super strongly that they needed to try and introduce one of these things, they can do it as an act of civil disobedience. And so when Congress goes on one of their month-long vacations, they could serve some time in the county jail as an act of civil disobedience. That would probably be, I'm sure, would be good for their fundraising numbers. All right, so that's that. Let me I want to address real quick the question of, is that legal? Can you make it so that Congress can't mess with Title II? And so part of the answer is, well, a legislature can't bind the hands of a future legislature. So that is there's sort of some truth to that. But can you pass this law that says it would be a Class B misdemeanor to do such things? And I think yes. I'm not a lawyer, but here's why I think yes. Okay. So the Constitution, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, it says that each House may determine the rules of its proceedings and punish its members for disorderly behavior. It has the ability to decide what that disorderly behavior is. Now, you can make changes to these rules by law. Congress did it. They've done it. It happens on a regular basis. But there was one instance a few years ago where they wanted to raise the debt ceiling, and so they passed a law that would change Senate rules to sidestep the filibuster. So they crafted a change to the Senate rules, and the House and Senate and the President all agreed that that's how the Senate rules should be changed, and that became law. So we can do the same thing here. We have the ability. Then as far as punishment, can you punish? Can you, instead of just saying this is not something you can't do, can we punish people? And again, I think yes, because of a Supreme Court decision in 1906, Burton v. United States. And the Supreme Court ruled that Congress has the power to make it an offense against the United States for a senator or representative, as long as it does not interfere with the legitimate authority of the House or of Congress over their respective members. It was a anti-bribery thing that said, you couldn't, anti-corruption thing. And so we can pass those things and say, look, you're not allowed to do this as a member of Congress. And so once again, that principle ought to be applied here. It might be challenged in court, but okay, we can work out a truce. I don't know if you noticed the last 222, this prohibition repealed in 10 years. It is repealed at 12:01 a.m. on October 16th, 2034. And that is so that in 2034, the American Union, the People's Legislative Assembly that year, can, if necessary, propose a reevaluation in that year's legislative package. So in 10 years, we can revisit this. But in the meantime, let's do what we know works. Let's do the things that will reduce the number of needless deaths, and we will all come out ahead. I need your help to do that. So please join me again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Visit An American Union to learn more, sign up to be a dues paying member, and I will see you then. Thanks. That's it. That's the hour.